So this week might go down as one of the most memorable testing weeks that we've seen, given that we've been watching so many firsts. Not only did SpaceX roll out the gigantic version 3 Super Heavy to the brand new Pad 2, we watched them begin putting the entire system through its paces. We've got brand new hardware, brand new engines, a matching new launch mount and flame trench, and it all needs to come together perfectly as we count down to the very first static fire. Along with that, a few Falcon 9 missions, a final flight for Firefly Alpha's Block 1, sweet new stuff on DART and the future of asteroid redirection, and good news for Artemis II topping that off. It has been another busy week.
Okay, Neil, we can see you coming down the ladder now.
Hey, Marcus House with you here, and my goodness, what a week at Starbase we have to digest here. Last week, we signed off with this booster transport stand having just rolled in, and it was placed in the ring yard preparing for the first version 3 Super Heavy Booster 19 to prepare for static fire. Not long after we published on Saturday morning, that stand was already rolling into Mega Bay 1, as we can see here, thanks to the live views from Avid Space. This week is the moment that we have been waiting for a long time, because we would finally be seeing a whole string of firsts involving not only the Super Heavy itself, but also the testing process for the freshly built Pad 2, all designed to launch the largest and most powerful rocket ever constructed. A few hours later, that door opened on the Mega Bay once more, revealing that Booster 19 was definitely ready to come out to play. SpaceX shared some incredible shots of it here sitting in the doorway, giving us our very first look at the new gigantic grid fins for the version 3 design installed and ready for testing. The lifter was disconnected from the hot stage ring and it rolled out of the doorway ever so gently to make sure that they didn't bump any of the 3 grid fins on the way out. You can see these workers in the lifts here were keeping a close eye on exactly that. Once in the ring yard, they spent about an hour combing over the vehicle, making sure everything was looking good, as we can see here thanks to NSF. I think this is a great example of scale for us as we watch the crew climb those ladders there to access the quick disconnect ports and give them one last wipe over and install the covers. Sean, working along with us here, was out there to capture it rolling around to Remedios Avenue and then, of course, around onto Highway 4 to make its way down to the launch site. There sure is some absolutely insane engineering down here at the base of the version 3 Super Heavy. It's going to be an incredible thing to see just how this hardware holds up to multiple launches in the future. The views into the actual engine section were very limited due to it being a night rollout, but we could already see that there were definitely engines on Booster 19. How many though was the question. Once arriving at the launch site, it was immediately rolled over to Pad 2 and positioned between the 2 tower arms, which were then raised about halfway up the tower for finer adjustment throughout the morning. We had this beautiful sunrise putting on quite a show in the meantime. Now with the version 3 design, the grid fin setup doubles as the lift points, which we were all keen to see. The next step was to hook the tower arms up underneath for the first time. Zooming in here, this is how it looks now. The arms hook up under these small nubs for both lifting and of course catching. I think it's really neat how this is all now integrated into the bottom of the 2 side grid fins. With the arms in position, they could pull up to start taking on some of the weight of the beast, and wow, look at that flexing on the arms and carriage. If you look down here at the stand, do you see it raising slightly? Yeah, it seems that SpaceX may have performed some sort of pull or load testing on those grid fins, which makes perfect sense since we've not seen them do any testing publicly on those grid fin sockets. We still think a possible future upgraded test tank made from a part of the B18.3 test tank may do this sort of testing more thoroughly, as it had of course crumpled early in its first test. We will soon find out about that, but next, SpaceX hooked up the stabilization pins and began to retract the clamps inside the transport stand. Once those were out, the booster was free to rise, and as it slowly began to clear the stand, it became clear that they had absolutely not installed all 33 Raptor engines. Instead, a very unique engine layout was coming into view. I suspect at this stage at least they don't want to risk too many of the new Raptor 3 engines in an early test, just in case there is an issue that causes damage to all of those installed. Sean with us was out there getting a much closer view of those engines as it began to translate over to the pad deck. Chatting to him afterward, he said that it felt like watching the beginning of a new era, and this sort of thing is quite an emotional experience. Thanks of course to you for being subscribed here so that we get to bring this to you. These days we are fighting against the flood of AI garbage, and I always feel proud that we have enough of your support to be able to keep doing this. You know, I think eventually there is going to be a much more brutal kickback with AI content. I think everybody is just really fed up with it, and they're going to value real stuff that is verifiably made by humans much more. It is just so much more inspiring watching the real, like Super Heavy being tested for the first time. Now there are 10 out of the 33 Raptor engines in place here, so basically 30% of the normal thrust that the full Super Heavy will be capable of. Take notice of the positions that they are all installed though. They have 4 non-gimbaling engines on the outer ring of 20, 4 which do provide that thrust vectoring control from the middle ring of 10, and 2 out of the inner 3 engines as well. They are obviously spread out in different ways here, but they are also not consistently placed, so it's hard to know exactly why each is placed where it is. Perhaps they're trying to test certain areas of the flame trench. One thing I will say is that it is kind of bizarre to think that even with just these 10 Raptor 3s, there is still comfortably more thrust potential installed here than a Falcon Heavy blasting off the pad. The lack of engine shielding is intentional for this version of the Super Heavy, by the way. It is part of SpaceX's relentless efforts to simplify the vehicle and make it totally reusable. It's worth pointing out the renders that were recently put out by SpaceX show the aft with a pretty neat black paint job, so I'm wondering if they will have it looking like this for Flight 12 or not. Moving on though, the booster was lowered into the launch mount for the first time, and if you look here, we can see the hold down clamps engaging as the booster gets close to resting on the clamp arms. So there it was, the first version 3 booster to sit on the brand new Pad 2. Quite a sight, and of course, SpaceX couldn't pass up the opportunity to share that epic view. Now in those posts, they confirmed that they would be running a series of tests to activate Pad 2 at Starbase, exercising new propellant loading operations and operating a vehicle with the new Raptor 3 engines installed for the first time. We assumed that meant that they would perform at least one cryogenic test or a static fire rehearsal before attempting the real deal. Well, at the start of the week, the 2 quick disconnects, one for liquid oxygen and one for liquid methane, were hooked up to the vehicle. The team inspecting the fit there didn't seem to spot any issues because they didn't need to try this again. Hours later, we already saw some venting from these ports at the top of the methane tank. With those initial pressure tests performed, all was looking well because workers, as you can see here, began to remove the remaining scaffolding on the top deck. Now, I mentioned last week that the roof work shouldn't slow down progress, and that thought was validated here because the crane was simply laid down behind the tower. It's worth mentioning the obvious benefit of the new Pad 2 design because we now have in play a bi-directional flame trench instead of that 6-exit stool. That means that SpaceX has much better control of where all that exhaust goes, so just laying down the crane here means it is perfectly fine. When the sun came up, the arms had let go of the 2 side grid fins used for lifting and catching, and they moved upward to the testing and launch position, similar to what we've seen them do so many times before on Pad 1. While the arms were rising though, we can see here with NSF that they performed a wiggle test on all 3 grid fins. A great clip as well from Avid Space here of these rotating as far as they can. Now, you may have noticed, by the way, that the grid fin positioned at the back or the belly side of the Super Heavy is designed slightly differently than those on the sides, which are designed to produce that important pitch angle for maximum control. If you look here, the steel panels that it is built out of appear to be slanted in the design. We can show this in much more detail thanks to the help by Chameleon Circuit. This we think is being done so that on the booster return, the air flowing through the grid fin is producing as little drag as possible at those higher angles of attack. After all, the drag produced by this grid fin would want to pitch the vehicle upward when the side grid fins are trying to pitch it down. The engineering on all of this is astounding, and there's a real science and questioning process that goes into understanding massive solutions needed for problems, but also the very small. Think of something like a razor that has the job of cutting a wide variety of hair types with super precision. One weird question: should the blade that you are using actually flex and move? Does that help avoid irritation or cause it? Well, most irritation isn't about sensitive skin, it's about blade instability. I had always assumed that plastic cartridge razors that have blades on springs feel safe and forgiving because they kind of tilt around the contours of your skin. Instead, when you zoom right in though, it isn't as good as it may seem. Because the blades aren't securely fixed in place, they move through hair inconsistently, tugging at different angles and causing friction. Most of the time you don't sense this while actually shaving, but later you get that itching feeling of razor burn. What you want instead is a razor that holds a single blade securely right across so that there is no flex, and that's the idea with Henson's AL13. This has been machined from solid aluminum with no moving or flexing parts. This also adds another great benefit too. You want the blade angle against each hair to be consistent so that each is cleanly cut with the least amount of tugging possible. Like with any much larger cutting tool, angle is critical as well as sharpness, so if a blade hits the wrong angle due to flexing, it won't cut cleanly. Henson's design has the blade secured at a perfect cutting angle of 30 degrees, and it only sticks out less than the thickness of a human hair, so it is almost impossible to cut yourself with it. That super precision means that you just lightly glide the blade over your skin rather than needing to use any pressure. It's very cost effective too, because instead of throwing away a bunch of plastic cartridges, you're only switching out a standard double-edged blade. In fact, Henson is offering 100 blades completely free if you want to pick up the AL13. Just go to hensonshaving.com, pick a razor colour, add the 100 blade pack to your cart, and enter the code Marcus at checkout for those blades to pop up free. Thank you, Henson Shaving. Okay, so let's get back to that testing process for Booster 19 after those grid fin rotations. Continuing through the rest of the day, all simply ended with a few tests of the detonation suppression system under Pad 2 in advance of the testing closure scheduled for the next morning. Overnight, the doors on the quick disconnects and on the bunker were shut and the pad was clear, and you know what this means. That had SpaceX set up nicely for the first testing roadblock on Highway 4 since October of last year. Yeah, it has certainly been a while. Great shots here from Fabian as the sun rose over the complex that morning. Both the liquid oxygen and methane sides of the tank farm were waking up and venting furiously as they began to run propellant through all the lines headed over to the pad. Unlike Pad 1, where we previously had a very distinctive vent that came out of the side of the launch mount during this chill down process, it doesn't seem like Pad 2 has any such visible venting, so the only indication that we had propellant load underway was when the frost actually began to creep up the tank walls, and well, there it was, the very first cryogenic propellant load being performed on Pad 2, and I think this went so smoothly that it blew everybody's expectations out of the water. Many of us expected a short, small loading test first, but they must have had no indication of any issues because they filled the oxygen tank to near full capacity and presumably just enough methane for a static fire test. All of this was done super rapidly too, in just 30 minutes. Remember that a fully stacked Starship has about 10 times the amount of propellant as a Falcon 9, but is being loaded about 15 minutes faster. That is insane, but if they really do want rapid launch capability, they've got to have the tank farm shooting that propellant in at lightning speed. With the expected T0 arriving for this test, the tank farm died down, the detonation suppression system activated, and the deluge started. No fire this time, however, which we believe was expected. It is likely that they were just performing a spin prime test of the 10 engines first. Now, we haven't seen this confirmed by SpaceX, and there is really no way to confirm this visually. Typically, we could at least hear this, however, that deluge system on Pad 2 is just so much more powerful, so they're doing a great job there hiding any clues. The entire test must have gone exceptionally well because no more than 20 minutes later, new closures were published for further testing and Booster 19 was detanked. Shortly after that, we had a significant purge from the aft of the booster, and perhaps this was some sort of nitrogen purge test. The road was already open, which rules out any sort of spin prime. So the same sort of testing was going on the next evening, but they did it one engine at a time until finally doing what seemed to be all 10 of them again. The tank farm went wild, and away they went, refilling the booster to what appears to be the same level as the previous test. This time though, only the detonation suppression system was activated. No deluge this time, but notice the white clouds of vapour rising out of the ends of the trench. This does look more like the spin primes that we've seen in the past, but no official confirmation on that yet. We also have no indication of any issues with what looked to be another successful test, and they were soon detanking again. Now, in a turn of events, instead of going right into static firing, SpaceX began operations to destack Booster 19. The arms were hooked up and the transport stand rolled over to Pad 2. It was in fact lifted off the mount and placed back down onto the transport stand in the early hours on Friday. Now that doesn't mean there was a problem. You may recall Pad 1 used to have a worker access platform that they would raise and lower before and after any sort of testing or launches, but Pad 2 does not have this. Obviously, they can't just drive one under the mount, so any changes or inspections that they want to perform now needs to be done on the transport stand beside the mount. Hopefully, they're just simply reconfiguring Booster 19 to get ready for static fire shortly, because the aft is, we believe, covered with all sorts of sensors that likely need to be removed or further protected for this next stage of testing. There are closures posted for tomorrow on Sunday the 15th of March through to the 18th for that possible static fire, so stay tuned. With all that excitement on the booster side of things, let's quickly take a second to talk about the ship being prepared for this same flight. Early in the week, SpaceX announced that they were done with cryogenic proof testing on Ship 39. Over the several days, they tested multiple propellant systems and assessed the structural strength by performing the squeeze testing to mimic the forces of future ship catches. It was time, though, to roll it back to the production site. Sean was of course out there to catch it as it rolled out of Massey's and on its way down to Mega Bay 2, where it was quickly lifted off the stand and moved to one of the side stations. We are still waiting to see if version 3 Raptor engines are being installed for its own static fire campaign, or if they still want to do some more testing beforehand. Typically, the initial cryo testing would involve some sort of thrust simulations on the aft dome using actuators, but that hasn't happened yet. In fact, the stand to do that sort of thing is still being constructed in the Sanchez area of the site. Luckily this week, the 6 actuators have been installed, so it may be coming real soon. Some Falcon 9 action this week other than Starlink. This was another late night launch from Florida's Space Coast, sending a powerful new direct broadcast satellite on the way to a geostationary orbit for EcoStar and Dish's network. It was Booster 1085 hurling the second stage out of the atmosphere from Space Launch Complex 40, and there at fairing separation was EcoStar 25, the communications satellite designed to strengthen Dish Network's television broadcast services across North America. The booster made its way down for a smooth 14th landing on the drone ship, a short fall of gravitas. SpaceX then deployed the EcoStar 25 satellite roughly 33 minutes into the mission once it was positioned into that all-important geosynchronous transfer orbit. From here, the spacecraft is manoeuvring itself into its final position under its own power. It will sit 110 degrees west over the equator. It will operate using the Ku band frequencies to beam television signals down to Earth, and is the company's first broadcast satellite placed in orbit since EcoStar 23 launched in 2017. So yeah, it has been a while. It's worth noting this is also launched at a time when the broader partnership between EcoStar and SpaceX is rolling out, which includes a massive $17 billion spectrum deal that happened last year, which will help expand Starlink Mobile's direct-to-cell network in the coming years. Along with that, of course, we had the typical set of Starlink missions. Starlink Group 1718 was away in the early hours of Sunday morning from Vandenberg Space Force Base with another set of 25 in the stack. Booster 1097 was only on Flight 7 for this mission, landing there on the drone ship Of Course I Still Love You a few minutes later. That left just the one more for the week on Friday morning back across the country at Vandenberg. This booster, however, was a true veteran, Flight 32 for booster 1071 here, and given this is only one landing away from the fleet leader, it is still a pretty nerve-wracking moment seeing if this one will also stick the landing given its age. No problem though, because there it was touching down safely on Of Course I Still Love You, making it the one runner-up to the flight leader. We also finally had the much more rare Firefly Alpha taken to the sky this week and its final mission too. After a few delays over the past few weeks, Firefly was in the sky again after almost a year since the last. In April of 2025, you may recall that they had an issue during stage separation which caused damage to the second stage engine. That sadly meant they couldn't deliver the payload satellite into orbit. This time though, the mission was going much more smoothly after their launch from Vandenberg Space Force Base on Wednesday. This mission for Firefly Alpha was the 7th and aptly named Stairway to 7. About 2 minutes and 40 seconds in, Alpha cleanly separated its first stage this time, and roughly 30 seconds later, the payload fairing was flying away as the upper stage continued its climb to space. Now Firefly is only retiring this Block 1 variant of the rocket and will switch to the much more capable Block 2. That's going to be a few meters taller and will use avionics, batteries and optimized propellant tanks all developed in-house. That they say should increase reliability and the production rate of the Alpha Block 2 vehicle. In fact, in this mission, the rocket was also serving as a testbed for a bunch of Block 2 flight systems and hardware. Anyway, this all went really nicely. At around 8 minutes, the upper stage engine shut down right on time, reaching that intended low orbit. Firefly had soon declared mission success, so it's nice to see they've had a good run validating those key systems for the big upgrade. Keep in mind, they also had a demonstrator payload for Lockheed Martin on board, so they've kicked some big goals on this one. Along with that, we have a quick update on the Artemis II mission coming soon to send astronauts around the moon for the first time since 1972. NASA has already completed the flight readiness review on Thursday this week with the exciting announcement that they were go to proceed towards launch. They should now be rolling out the SLS with Orion still on top on March 19 late this week. They should have it arrive at Pad 39B late that day, and the first available launch attempt is set to Wednesday, April the 1st. Don't you just love it when we have big events penciled in for April Fool's Day? All I can say is just make sure that you are watching the official streams if it is indeed flying that day. We do have some neat new interesting information regarding the impact results from NASA's DART mission, which has been published in the journal Space Advances this week. It turns out that the impact didn't just slow down the orbit of Dimorphos around the much larger parent Didymos, but we now know that this in turn has also changed the entire binary system's speed around the Sun too. Enough time has passed since that test that we have now been able to measure it. Since the impact, their 770-day orbital period around the Sun has decreased by a tiny but measurable fraction of a second, and to quote JPL, that change marks the first time a human-made object has measurably altered the path of a celestial body around the Sun. That's so cool. We now know that the momentum from all that debris being kicked out was essentially like thrust that we would see from a rocket engine. The specific impulse, of course, is terrible, but you get the idea. Just the observations needed to create the full picture of their orbit had to be taken at very particular times and locations around the world, so the dedication it took by so many to obtain this finding is impressive alone. A few fractions of a second in an orbit doesn't sound like much, however, with enough warning, the knowledge that we now have and a capability to hit an asteroid with a sizable vehicle may mean the difference between getting hit hard and partially or totally avoiding a catastrophic collision with Earth. Now, on a related note, Blue Origin's timing was well on point, as this week they've confirmed they've been working alongside JPL and Caltech to develop the Near-Earth Objects Hunter. This is essentially a planetary defense platform based around Blue Origin's Blue Ring satellite bus. It looks like the deflection methods it will use will range from a sophisticated ion beam that would slowly push an object over time to a much more simplistic brute force direct kinetic impact, somewhat similar to that DART mission method. So, although only early days yet, it does seem like humans may indeed be finally gearing up to punch fate in the face. So there we have it, my friends, another week done and dusted. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to hit subscribe so we get to keep making them. If you want to continue with more space goodness, check out this video here next. And thanks for watching all this way through. As always, that makes a huge difference to us. I'll see you all next week.